Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, welcome everybody to the Spark release overview for version 6.6, which will be rolling out this Saturday. And we're going to go through I'm Emily McCarty. I'm on the Spark team, and I'm presenting here with Eric Swinson today. We'll go through this release call. So let's jump right in. So we're going to go through what's new, what's been changed, what's fixed, and then a quick demonstration. And if you all have any questions at the end, we'll also go through those. So jumping into what's new, we are going to go into the project accounting features and kind of show you some updates that we made there. There have been some major enhancements where you can now automatically create a deposit schedule per product, and you can also track multiple deposit installments and track refunds given to the borrower better with this updated project accounting. We've also had some updated fee changes where you can now replace the fee status that was filled previously with there's two questions now whether or not you can say if the fee is coming out of the closing of the loan proceeds or not. And then you also have the ability to make to mark a fee as paid without associating it to an actual invoice. We also have a brand new automated closing statement, and this is going to automatically balance based on the information in the project accounting section and the current budget. So most likely users will have to answer some questions about how the funds are going to be allocated, and you'll be able to change the name of the disbursement categories, but the actual amounts are not going to be editable. We also made some changes to the pending disbursements with the guarantee fees and soft fees. So prior to this release, the pending disbursements were automatically created for the guarantee and soft fees for a package whenever it moved into the funding stage. It's no longer going to do that. So now you'll have a prompt on the disbursement manager to actually create the disbursements for the guarantee fee and soft fees. We've also made some significant enhancements to our reporting. So we now have additional reporting capabilities, which I know that you all have been looking for quite some time. So now we're removing some of the reports that were rarely used. We rearranged the navigation. We were making it a lot more flexible, and you can now configure custom reports. And those are going to be made kind of on a case-by-case basis. We'll be looking at long-term view of what's best for your organization and be implementing those custom reports based on the capacity we have to make the reports at this time. So they are configurable, but they're currently not configurable on your specific Spark page. You'll have to reach out to the support team to get those custom reports done. So now on to what's changed. We have an update to the credit summary and pre-screen memo titles. Beforehand, it just said credit summary or pre-screen memo. Now it's actually going to be named as, so if you call your credit summary a credit memo, it will now come up as a credit memo. For the SBA Form 1919, which is a personal history statement, question 10 is going to be automatically answered as yes. So if borrowers were filling this out, we found that they were filling it out incorrectly. And if the borrower, it's going to automatically just default to yes, since they'll most likely be using the third-party packager or lender referral. So it just kind of eliminates some confusion that we had with that. We also have changes to the document verification, where you're now going to be able to actually verify the document on the documents page itself. Some of the other prompts you'll be able to reset the status. You can mark it as verified or mark it as invalid. And if you mark a document as verified, that's going to put it in read-only mode for external users. They can't go in and mess with that document anymore. We also made changes to the equity tracking. So it will no longer let you create deposits. That will also be a read-only as an improved injection. We have some updates to the Docusign request page, where you can now see that the full page will be displayed in Spark instead of an abbreviated version of that. And we also have default conditions and covenants that will be associated with new packages, and they can be configured to default based on your specific settings. So that's a new change that we have going on there. And then finally, we did make some fixes. So the notifications page was getting locked after it moved into the funding stage. It will no longer be locked at any time during the process, so you can go into the notifications page. The information request reminders, we had an issue where they were sending out to authorized users who were no longer associated with the package. We fixed that now, so they won't be getting any updates if they're not on the package anymore. We also had some issues in the financial analysis section where if you had an account with no sub-accounts, it would give you an error when you tried to save that financial analysis. And we've gone ahead and fixed that, so you'll no longer see that error message. For the lender management, we've resolved errors with the 9-digit zip code where it wasn't allowing you to save. That's now been fixed, so you can save the 9-digit zip for new lenders. And for active information request, we saw in some instances there'd be an active request with draft workflows. So the external user couldn't actually see those draft workflows in the request. We've now fixed that where they will, as long as the request is active, the external user will be able to see that active request. And then the select columns and customize page features on the homepage widget will no longer be visible to role-specific home pages. So they'll still appear on your personal homepage. They'll just no longer be visible on the role-specific home pages. And then we've had some other various bug fixes that we've been working on. For instance, we just updated some issues that we were having with HubZone. So now that's flowing incorrectly to each of your Spark pages. So now I will turn it over to Mr. Swenson, and he can roll you through the demos.
All right, thank you, Emily. I'm going to just take a second here and get my screen sharing going. And can you all see the Spark homepage here? All right. So I am going to walk through a few of the new features that Emily just described there. And I want to start with the deposit tracking and kind of fee-related changes that we've been working on. So I'm going to first jump into our configuration area. So going back to the borrower deposit tracking, one of the things that we are able to do now, since many lenders typically have a deposit that they want to capture, we now have the ability to kind of set up the expectation for that deposit to happen. So at the product level, we can go into our settings and you'll see a new section for deposit requirement. So if you do want to have a deposit collected on your product, you simply click yes here, and then you choose how you want that deposit to be structured. So at the top here, we're talking about the overall deposit requirement. So say, for example, you want to collect a total of $10,000 from your applicant on the transaction. You can decide to say, I want to just have a fixed amount of $10,000. You do also have the ability to set it based on a percent of the loan amount. So if you want it to be a fluctuating value based on that, you can do it here. We've also got the ability to have a combination of both. So you can collect that however you'd like. Once you've determined the overall amount, you then can also set up your deposit installments. And we have a couple of different categories for what that looks like. So you can have an upfront fee. You can have one that you collect at the letter of interest stage, commitment letter. And then you can also have one for the SBA products for the packaging fee. And that will actually align with the packaging fee that's set up on the product to be automatically that same amount. So it will auto calculate based on the packaging fee on the loan. I'm going to just jump back to my 7A product here and show you I've got set up. So we're going to collect a fixed amount of $5,000 or 10% of the loan amount. and then I've set it up to say I want the lesser of those two. And I've got it into 2 installments, a letter of interest, and a commitment letter. So if I jump out to my demo loan here, you can see I've got a $150,000 loan, and I'm going to navigate down to project accounting, and I'm going to click on my deposits tab here. You can see my required deposit is $5,000. So if it had been a percent of loan amount, it would have been $15,000. But because I wanted the lesser of those two, it chose the $5,000. And then it took that $5,000 and divided it in half into my 2 installments. So now, as soon as I create the loan package, this information gets set up and is ready for me to start tracking against when I need to do that. A couple of things you'll notice on this page is the UI is different. We have these buckets here across the top where we've got our required deposit, our pending deposit, our received deposit, and then a balance. So obviously the required is what's set up. A pending means I have not received any money from the applicant. Once I do receive money from them and I track it in here, the received deposit will show up here and it will show me a remaining balance. Once I do that, once I collect those funds from an applicant, the way to track that would be to come in here and just click this track button. And then I just say, where the money came from, what amount it was, how it was received. So this is similar to what it used to be before, but we've added a few extra questions. You'll notice here also, if you do have an equity injection requirement, you can tag the deposit as being part of the equity, and that comes into play later when we're looking at the closing statement and whether you can refund any of that deposit or not. So if I say yes here, that then will also flow into the equity tracking feature. I'm just going to attach my proof document and save. And now you'll see I've got a received deposit. My pending deposit is at $2,500. I've got my received and then my balance of $2,500. As I go over to the fees now, because I have collected a deposit, I want to just highlight a couple of the differences on the fee tracking page. You'll notice the UI looks similar to the deposits now, and it looks very different than what it did before. So we've got some bucket high-level categories here for total fees, paid fees, and then a deposit balance. So all that information we're collecting about the deposits kind of flows over to the fees as well. And then I've got a breakdown of the fee summary and the current deposits. In our previous release, when you created a fee, there were 3 different buckets that you could choose to have it allocated against. It could be due at closing, paid outside of closing, or financed from loan proceeds. We've streamlined that a little bit and surfaced that right in line with the fees. So I have an option here to just say, yes, I'm financing this fee from loan proceeds. And yes, also this fee is paid from the deposit. So you can actually have it set up where you take in money for the deposit and use that to pay fees, but then you can also reimburse the applicant for those fees through the financing later on, and that again comes down into the closing statement. If you want to handle it that way, you can. I'm going to go ahead and just mark this fee as paid out. Mark as paid without invoice. So this is also one of the new features we've added, so that I can track a fee as paid, and I'm going to go ahead and say save that. Now you'll see that fee moves down into the paid fees instead of pending. I do have it financed because I have it paid from deposit for an amount of $2,500. You can see my deposit balance is now 0. Obviously, if I actually had a smaller fee, let's move that down to $2,000, save that. You can see my deposit balance is $500. And the other thing you'll notice is that the user interface kind of updates on the fly as you're making changes here. So there's no need to save every time you're interacting with the page here. Moving down to the closing statement, and I do see a question came in. I will circle back to that at the end. But I'm going to move down. I'm going to switch over to my demo package that's over in the closing stage. So I can move down to my closing statement. Just a quick stop at the project accounting here. We're kind of in a similar situation to where we were. I've got my deposit balance of $500. When I go to generate my closing statement, you'll see some differences here, particularly when you first create a new closing statement based on the deposit tracking and the state of the fees that have been tracked in project accounting. You may be asked a couple of questions here. In this case, I have a remaining equity deposit, so this is basically telling me you took in a deposit of $2,500. Only $2,000 of those fees have been paid by that deposit, so there's a remaining balance of $500. In this particular case, I identified that deposit as coming from equity, which means I can't refund it to the applicant because it then wouldn't be considered equity. So it's just basically telling me you're going to have this additional $500 that will have to go to some other purpose later on. The second box here is the fees financed from loan proceeds. And again, this used to be something that you would reconcile after you opened the closing statement. We've now surfaced that onto this page before we render the actual document. So basically all this is saying is that you've identified a certain set of fees to be financed from loan proceeds. What use of proceeds do you want that to come from? So I can just go ahead, I'm going to select working capital here and hit create. And this is one of the other things you will see that is different. Our closing statement format has changed slightly to align more directly with the way we're handling the borrower deposit tracking and the fees. So up at the top, I've got my credits, which is the loan amount plus all of the injection that I've received from the applicant. You can see we still have the fees paid outside of closing and finance from loan proceeds. Those categories are still there, and that's that we just changed the way you set those values. And then we've got our use of proceeds down here. You'll notice I can't change the numbers here, but as I hover over this, I can change the name of this. So if you want to tag this, you can change the name of the item in here to provide a little more context for the borrower at the closing when they see the document. The question that came in, do you have a deposit amount, dollar or percent, or can deposits be required, but amounts vary based on decisions by staff? That's a good question. I'm going to just jump back in here. One thing I didn't highlight on this deposit is you can configure the default settings based at the product level. At any point in the process, if you receive money from an applicant, you can always add a deposit here that is outside of that default configuration. So I can just pick, if I got a $500 check at some point for something, I can put a comment in here and indicate that it's already been received, which will then prompt me to say when, how did I receive it, where did it come from, and then whether it's equity or not. So we surfaced that same form in this process. And I'll just go ahead and save that. And now I just have 2 received deposits. So you can have as many as you want along the way, so you can really react however you need when the money comes in the door. A couple other things I wanted to highlight here over in equity tracking. You'll notice when I first put in the deposit, I indicated that it was to be included with equity. And when I came over to the equity tracking, you can see that letter of interest deposit flows over here as a read-only injection. So that goes back to why you can't modify it on the closing statement, or you can't refund that amount to the applicant because it's part of the equity tracking. And so we automatically will flow that information over to the equity tracking feature. Moving on to a couple of the other enhancements this release. The first one I wanted to show was the new document validation features. And for those of you that interact with checklists a lot, you're familiar with this functionality there, which is basically this far right column with a verified status. This was a capability that we had built into the checklist so that someone could come in and look at the documents that are attached, make sure that they are set up how they should be and that it's the actual document it should be, and then they can verify or decline that or mark that as invalid. We've basically taken this column from the end of that checklist there and surfaced it in the documents area of Spark. So as I move over here, you'll see these top documents don't have anything attached, and this little gray bar on the right indicates that it's an empty placeholder. If I scroll down here to my proof of deposits, you'll see I have a yellow bar. That tells me that I have a document attached, but it has not been reviewed and is either valid or invalid. If I go to my actions menu, you'll see we have a new section here that surfaces basically that toggle button that typically shows up on all the checklists. So from here in this actions menu, I could go ahead and say, I'm going to mark this document as invalid. You notice the little color bar on the left changes to red. That's an indicator that that document is not ready to go. It's not what it should be. If I do that by mistake, I can always reset the status, and then I could also mark it as verified. And as Emily stated earlier, once I do mark that document as verified for external applicants that log into their loan on Spark, if they go into the documents area, the only thing they'll be able to do with this document is look at it. They won't be able to upload over the top of it. So once you've verified it, we want it to kind of be locked for the applicant's view of the system. Again, similar to how it works with the checklists, the ability to do these actions is permission controlled, so we will align the permissions. Basically, if you can do it in the checklist, you'll be able to do it in the documents. So we can have a subset of your team members have access to this, whereas others may not be able to. So that's still supported. The last thing I wanted to touch on was the default conditions and covenants, and to just provide a little context there. If we go into our conditions and covenants, by default, when a new loan is created or as you go through the process, and I'm just going to unlock this as I go, we don't provide any conditions that show up automatically by default when you create a loan package. So basically, if you want to have conditions tracked on your loan, you have to come in, click this button, and then start typing, and then choose from the library that's available. And now I can save that, and it's here. So what we've done, because a lot of lenders have either conditions that are kind of boilerplate that they always want included, or they want to just be able to see a default set of conditions, and then so they're starting from a set of conditions and then be able to delete the ones that don't apply. You can kind of reverse that concept now. And so what we have set up, I'm going to jump over to the configuration area. If we scroll down to the conditions library, this is where we define all of the conditions that are available in that kind of type ahead suggestion area. If I go to my conditions of closing, you can see here this badge over on the left called auto. That tells me that when I create a new loan package, this condition will automatically be included in the conditions and covenants for that new loan package. If I want to add additional items and make them set as default, I can either edit existing ones, and there's now a new yes no button here, and I can say yes, I want this included on new packages automatically. Click save, and now the next time a new loan gets created, both of these conditions will pre-populate into that section. Obviously, just because they're pre-populating doesn't mean that you're forced to leave them there. So none of the functionality with conditions in Covenant is otherwise different. So if I do have a default condition that comes in that I don't want, I can just delete it from the list, and then it will be gone. Now, I'll just highlight right now, this only happens when you create a new loan package. There isn't a way to have the system kind of refresh the conditions and go and look at that and pull in all the default ones. We may look at future enhancements to extend this capability, but right now it only happens at package creation time. That is all I was going to cover today. If there's any other questions, I'll hang out on the line. If you find in your GoToWebinar area, there should be a place where you can raise your hand. And then that I can take you off mute if you want to ask the question. You can also type it in the box, or if you prefer to reach out to us after the fact, please feel free to send an email to support@lenwithspark with some questions. All right. It looks like there are no questions. So with that, I will wrap up. Again, just a reminder, this release is going out this coming Saturday night on our typical release schedule. So come Monday morning, you will all be updated with all of this functionality that you've seen today. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact us at support@lenwithspark. Thanks, everybody.